Thank you for joining our first Acrobatiq Q&A panel webinar of the series called Essentials for Effective Online Course Content. My name is Sharon Schwarzmiller, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's web event. Feel free to tweet comments out to at Acrobatiq on Twitter, and you can use the hashtag of Learning Engineers to spread the word about what we are talking about here today. For housekeeping, let's talk about how we can participate today. You can click the arrows on the Grab tab in the rectangular box on the left-hand side of your control panel to open and close it. To minimize any audio issues, please make sure that you've chosen the audio mode that corresponds directly to your setup. If you're listening via your computer or headset, click Use Mic or Speakers. And if you've called in and wish to use your telephone, you can choose the telephone option. This is a Q&A session, so please make use of that Q&A text box on the panel to submit your questions, both technical and questions that you would like to submit to our panel members throughout our webinar. We're going to begin the webcast with a brief introduction of our two panel learning engineers and a few open poll questions so we can get to know you. So our webinar today features Kim Henry and Aaron Serwinski, both learning engineers at Acrobatiq. Our goal for today's webinar panel is to give you some tips on online course creation from the standpoint of content and design. There are many categories of tips that we could explore, like data or assessment, engagement, course prep, etc. And we're actually going to be hosting some Q&A panel webcasts on those particular topics in the coming months with our learning engineers. So look for invitations like those, or for those webcasts, if you will, in your inbox. But today is about giving you tips from Kim and Aaron on online course content and design. Many of you create courses yourself, or looking at courses created by publishers or online providers like Acrobatiq. And we felt having this kind of information in your holster is always helpful if you're creating or assessing the appropriateness of an online course for your students. Aaron and Kim will each give you a few minutes on what they think about when curating content for courses, and then we'll open it up for your questions. They'll give you the insight based on their experiences here at Acrobatiq and then from their extensive experiences doing online courseware for other organizations. Kim is a graduate of Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh. She's been working in educational technology for over 2 decades, and she's worked at Dynavox Meyer Johnson, formerly Dynavox Systems, iknowthat.com, and most recently, the Open Learning Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University. Aaron is a graduate of both Chatham University and Duquesne University, and has worked at Carnegie Mellon University's Open Learning Initiative as a project manager and course developer. And she's also at CMU, or was also at CMU Software Engineering Institute on various training, certification, and curriculum development projects. So without further exposition, we're going to ask you, our audience, a few poll questions, and then I'll hand it over to Kim. So let me throw out a question or two for all of you, and you can go ahead and answer this as it's most appropriate to your situation. So this is, which best categorizes your course load. Feel free to weigh in, and as soon as we get everybody kind of weighing in, I'll push our responses back out to all of you so you can kind of see how many people we have. Looks like it's slowing down. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, and I'll push it back out to all of you to see. Looks like these are our results here today, and you can see kind of what we've got here. It looks like a mix comprises a lot, and then, of course, a lot of people here who teach traditional courses as well, so that's good. Let's ask you another one here. This has to do with how long you've been teaching, so let me launch that poll for you. It should be an easy one. You can go ahead and put your answers in. And I'll give everybody just a couple more seconds, and we will close this poll up as well. All right. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll now to make sure that you have put your answer in and share the results to everybody out there. So you can see we've got a good mix here as well. A lot of folks at the two bookends of the spectrum, if you will. And one last one to let you participate and let us get to know you a little bit before we get started. And this one is a lot, well, similar to the one that we first put out there. And it's do you put your course materials online? How much of that do you do? Do it until I teach, I love it. Some people, you might just dabble in it. You see the value, but you just can't get the time, and or you're here because you just want to learn a little bit more. All right, I'm going to give you all just a couple more seconds to put your answers in, and I will close this poll. All right, looks like we've slowed down, and we'll like these results. These are fun. Looks like we've got a lot of people here. That's how they teach, and they like to put their stuff online. And that's good to know. So what I'll do is I'll hide the results here, and without further ado, I will hand it over to Kim.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to start out by sharing some thoughts about when I'm approaching courseware development. I'm really driven by kind of two primary elements, a big picture that represents the subject domain, and a set of student-centered, measurable learning objectives that articulate the essential concepts and skills that students should be acquiring as they engage in the course that's being developed. As described, the big picture is literally a picture. It depicts key aspects of the subject domain. It provides a knowledge structure or a construct in which students can relate the new concepts and skills that they are learning. For example, the big picture in Acrobatiq's probability and statistics course depicts the process of converting data into useful information. As a student encounters the topics of data analysis, data collection, probability, and inference, they are each highlighted in the big picture to really visually anchor and relate all that a student is going to learn and will learn about those topics to the process of converting data into meaningful information, which is indeed the essence of the big picture. As another example, big picture in an introduction to biology course might depict the story that's told through exploring concepts and topics related to matter, energy, life, reproduction, evolution, and interdependence, and show the connections to each of those. And again, the idea is to provide a way for students to really have a point of connection to what they're learning now, new information, new concepts, new skills, to a domain, to a larger context. So when thinking about learning objectives, the language of learning objectives should really be about capturing the level at which learning is occurring, and the level at which feedback is really relevant to the process of learning. Learning objectives, you can think about them as being designed to, one, communicate intentions clearly, so that both students and instructors and others who are interested in a particular course know exactly what the intentions are. You can kind of translate that into a question of what do you want your students to know and be able to do? A second aspect, a second point that learning objectives are designed to do is to provide a framework for selecting and organizing course content. You know, it's a process in some instances to identify the scope and sequence of a particular course, not only for itself as an entity, but how it relates within a sequence or potentially a curriculum. Again, a question that you might want to pose is, what is the essential information that supports the intentions that you want to communicate, and how should this information be organized? What is that framework? What should it look like? A third aspect is to have learning objectives that are designed to provide a framework for selecting appropriate teaching and learning activities. What are those experiences that you feel students must have? What are the concepts that students must be able to learn? And how will you state those in your learning objectives? Another point, another way that learning objectives can be used to capture this level of learning is to use learning objectives and to construct them and write them in such a way that they guide decisions about assessment and evaluation methods. You can think about it as a thought, a question to pose to yourself as to how will you measure whether students have learned the concepts and skills you intended. And then as a fifth aspect of learning objectives and considerations when writing and developing learning objectives, they can serve to give students information for focusing their learning efforts and monitoring their own progress, which is really a point to consider equally along with the other four notions that I just shared with you. Does the learning objective really clearly state what a student should be focusing on at this particular point in the course? Is the learning objective written in a way that they can reflect on what is stated in the learning objective in a way that really allows for some level of self-assessment? And you can imagine that without taking too many steps, you can get to the idea of metacognition and the role that that plays in the learning process for individuals. So another aspect of this early course development process and thinking about the scope of the course, articulating a set of learning objectives that really does capture these aspects of what you want the student experience to be, and what kind of measurable student-centered objectives you want to build your course around. Often leads to this question about, well, how many learning objectives might be needed to construct that framework for a course. And there are really a number of factors that I alluded to a couple of them earlier that can influence the body of learning objectives for a particular course. There are certainly standards that may be set by professional organizations that you need to be informed by when thinking about what the scope of a course, what topics and concepts and skills need to be covered. Then there are also, potentially advances or trends in a field or a domain. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the role of a course in a sequence or a curriculum, and then expectations that, in general, for a course that you're looking to design may exist based on either similar courses or or other kinds of expectations of that instructors may have.
And to follow on from what Kim just said, learning objectives are the cornerstone to developing great and effective course materials. But it's not a pure science to craft them, and there's a lot of iteration that goes on before you get to a final set of objectives. Some ways to start to think about developing objectives for your courses of course after you have some standards and other inputs into the body of learning objectives, is to start a list of questions that you want students to be able to answer about the subject material. So you can ask yourself, what do I want my students to know, remember, and understand from this segment of material? And specifically, you want to think about how you would assess and measure your students' knowledge. And then as you're developing your learning objectives, you want to go back over them and ask yourself, does each learning objective you crafted explicitly describe what you want your students to know or do? And if it doesn't, then you should be prepared to revise and iterate on those. In writing learning objectives, it's also important to select the right verbs so that you'll be able to measure whether students can demonstrate their knowledge. So for example, if your learning objective is asking students to compare and contrast something, it's important to make sure that you provide enough information and questions about the topic so students can make multiple comparisons and contrasts. Test your hypotheses about these objectives and revise if necessary. And so another aspect to iterate on is finding the right level of detail. And what I mean by this can be illustrated in an example that I can give from an anatomy and physiology course, where an objective might be to identify and describe the organs of the digestive system, or the objective could be stated to describe the stomach and its functions. For each of these, you can see where the type of information and the level of detail between these two learning objectives is different. And you want to maintain a similar level of detail across an entire course. This helps students to know what's expected of them and helps them to feel supported and scaffolded by the material. In the case of this example, you might want both of these objectives in an anatomy and physiology course, but the point is that you can't use those interchangeably, and the replacement in the course should be very purposeful. And then this brings us to talking about scaffolded activities that support the learning objectives.
So what do you do with student-centered measurable learning objectives once you have them? I think I wanted to, at this point, share a quote from Herb Simon, and I will read it quickly. Learning results from what the student does and thinks, and only from what the student does and thinks. The teacher can advance learning only by influencing what the student does to learn. It's about an active engagement, and it's the student that is doing the learning through that active process, and we are facilitators. So how can we do that well? So in general, the content development process, it really focuses around learning objectives related to particular skills and concepts, and there are various ingredients that can go into the design and development of a course. For example, in Acrobatiq courses, we have various types of formative and summative activities, and we call these adaptivities. They're activities that provide students a sufficient practice to really support each learning objective skills and knowledge components. So as you can tell, there's a process that's happening even with respect to looking at learning objectives and breaking those down to a more component level, so that what we can do in these active learning opportunities in these activities is to engage students in processes and in experiences that will really support the learning objective through an active engagement of an exercise, an activity, a set of questions that are very targeted to supporting that student-centered, measurable learning objective that you've written. Activities, they can be developed to capture and convey information. You can think about them incorporating must-cover concepts and skills, as well as common misconceptions, and to address and provide students with ways to experience that information in a very active and scaffolded learning experience that can be based upon hints and targeted feedback.
Yeah, and for me, one of the important takeaways about activities is about the alignment. When you align the content, learning objectives, and activities for a course, it's that is all essential for effective learning and teaching. And it may sound easy, but again, it's an iterative process. So up on the screen, you see there's another example from an anatomy and physiology course, where the learning objective is to describe the major functions of the digestive system. And then there's an activity question that could be that has been crafted against that learning objective, and it reads, lactose intolerance is caused by insufficient enzyme to digest which kind of organic compound? And you can see the answer choices there. And it's quite possible that by answering this activity question that the student would be describing some aspect of the digestive system. It's also possible that you could include feedback for the answer choices that could focus on digestive functions and tie that question back to the learning objective. But however, the point is that the alignment with the learning objective is not necessarily obvious here. And when the goal is to measure learning as it is taking place and to measure the right thing, I'd probably want to see some questions that, pointedly ask the students to describe functions of the digestive system. And that way, they're definitely getting what they need out of it. And so, sorry. So these are just some of the things that that we think about as we develop courses, learning objectives, alignment, and activities that support them. And these can be done in any format of a course, whether it's online or in a classroom or a hybrid of those.
All right, perfect. Now we've had a couple fun comments coming in, answers to your questions, Erin, and then I liked one question that I got that asked if we were planning on measuring the learning objectives of this session, which I think is probably something fun, right? We also did get some questions, as the both of you know. When we asked for people to register, we gave everybody the opportunity to submit a question of their choice to get kind of in front of you automatically, and so we put some of them here. And one of them was from Samantha, and she asked, how do you foster discussion and deal with written assessments in large enrollment courses? So let's throw that out there for the two of you quickly to answer for the group.
Sure. Yeah. So just to related to this, what we talked about with respect to learning objectives and activities and ways to support them, it has a real kind of cognitive feel and is really about that cognitive aspect of learning. But there also is a social element as well, and I think that this question really relates to that. I think that there are a couple of different ways to possibly support and foster more interaction and to facilitate that social aspect of learning. And one of the ways is through some peer review environments, peer editing environments, places where students can come together. And it could be something as kind of clear cut as a discussion forum where the instructor, a faculty member poses a question and students need to respond to it in some way and respond to each other's comments. But there are also some other environments. For example, there's a peer review editing environment called Emma that was developed at the University of Georgia, and it allows for peer editing. Students can share their work, they can comment on each other's work and provide detailed feedback, and they can kind of build portfolios, but also engage in sharing and providing some type of review for each other. Classroom Salon is another kind of social learning space that was developed at CMU, and if you're looking to maybe consider something that's really a more pure peer review, peer assessment environment. There's, for example, the SWORD peer assessment system, and you can actually enter rating prompts and really set up some relatively sophisticated means for students to offer peer review, and then to even provide feedback to the raters. So there's feedback for the feedback, all sorts of different things. And again, these are just some examples of some environments that one could consider. And again, it's about when you have large numbers of students in a course, how might you to set up and facilitate some kind of peer-to-peer interaction.
Yeah, Ken's done some, found some really nice technologies that support peer reviews, and has done some nice research on how and looked into how peer reviews can help support your students. I can speak from my own experiences in this case, in that use discussion boards at your particular institution. I'm sure that all of you have something that you can use, some technology, and to generate assignments where you ask students to respond thoughtfully to something, and then you can have students, other students respond to those students. I think the important thing is to to have a rubric for those is a good idea, and that then can be a guide for not only the first entry that the student makes on the discussion board, but then you can also use that to review and assess the responses as well. And so there are ways you can do it. You just got to be sometimes crafty, or look into some technologies that will support you.
Great. Thanks, both of you. We have another one here that came in from Suparna and Tariq, and the question was really around mobile learning. And if both of you could just briefly give us kind of your comments on designing or maybe content considerations for mobile learning.
So, I mean, when in designing content, whether it be for mobile or anything, again, it always comes back to the learning objectives. It just so happens that for mobile learning, you also need to consider any interactive components that you might want to use in your course. So, for instance, Flash doesn't work on mobile devices, and some videos use Flash as well. And so, other than that, you want to become familiar with accessibility standards and pay attention to the overall layout of a page. But again, the content should really be getting at those learning objectives, no matter what.
Yeah, I think part of it is about kind of keeping it clean in terms of layout of content, and just ease of access, ease of use, readability. These are pretty standard user interface and user experience guidelines, but they tend to be amplified in some ways when they're not done well, and you engage in content on a mobile device, and then you kind of see where things may have gone awry a little bit. So clean design, I think, is probably one of the fundamentals you want to keep in mind.
Okay, great. So we do have some questions that have come in, and then I'm just going to remind everyone here that, of course, they can tweet their comments, and can always submit questions after, or can submit questions now, as well as be sure to fill out our brief 3-question survey at the end of this webcast to give us your feedback on how we can do better for you. But in the meantime, I have some questions that have come in. One is from Kara, and she asks, what are your thoughts on making courses have printed components for students to do offline?
Well, certainly when you have elements of online courses that are engagement points for the student, where learning is occurring because and is facilitated by a student's active interaction with an element of the course. That does not translate over into a static printed context. So I think depending upon what your goals are and what design approach you've taken, that might not offer necessarily as much, that might not contribute as much as you might think to a student's learning process, particularly, again, if you've got these really active elements.
Right. And I would even add to that to say, if your goal is to know where students are active and where they might need trouble, if you're capturing learning data, as we do, and you want to know where students are actually learning, you'll want to encourage, as much interaction online as possible. We design our courses to specifically capture and measure learning that's taking place all along the way, and that helps you to know more about your students and where they're struggling and what their misconceptions are. And so, like Kim was saying, you want to do that carefully and thoughtfully, and make sure that they do have some interaction that you can monitor and see what's going on.
Great. So I know that we did designate a half an hour for this webcast, and we are able here to stay on a little bit longer. I do have a couple more questions that came in to go ahead and answer those, and we will do so for at least a little bit longer. So those of you who can stay with us, we'd appreciate that. That's great. But if you have to go, we understand. And of course, we send out the recording for all of this. So we actually had a question come in logistically around making sure that we do send out some of those discussion forum peer review items, and we will do that. We will send out some of those places that Kim was discussing so that you have them. And then we had a question come in quickly about how do you decide to organize the assessments for a topic? What do you take into consideration? This is from Barb. What do you take into consideration?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna keep being a broken record and saying, learning objectives are first and foremost. An assessment question should be measuring if those objectives are met. And the important things to consider for assessment is to ask questions that measure each part of an objective in a line, and to make sure that you are measuring the right things. When you're talking about higher cognitive levels, I think assessments should be as authentic as possible, and usually then you'd want to grade them with a rubric. But for lower level objectives, you can assess these in multiple ways that scaffold up to the higher order objectives. Kim, you want to?
I was just going to say, too, in thinking about the notion of when to assess, that oftentimes might occur naturally in the way that you have your course organized. There might be just really, specific points that you recognize are places where you want to engage a student in a quiz or a checkpoint, so that before they move too further along, they have an opportunity to engage in that kind of an assessment. But as Erin has mentioned, one of the fundamental aspects of what we like to do and think about a lot is the notion of through active learning, through activities that are infused and embedded all along the way throughout the course, where students are constantly getting feedback, data is being gathered, and so you don't necessarily have to rely on just those specific points where a student may take a quiz. They certainly can contribute to your understanding and evaluation of student learning, but they don't have to be the only source of information.
Great. I had a good question come in here from Cheryl, and she said, when you say interaction, do you mean student to student, student with content material, in parentheses the word textbook, or student with instructor? Would you be able to rank the importance of each interaction?
Well, I think I'm going to go back to Herb Simon's comment, which is that it's really about, the student is they're learning by what they do. We're facilitating. And we're facilitating through how course material is designed and organized, how you engage in interactions with your students. But really, they're driving. It's about what they do. So, I think that's really the focal point.
Yeah, I can't say that you'd want to rate any of those interactions or make any one of them more important. All interactions that the students have, whether it be with each other or with the instructor or with activities, paper and pencil or online activities, all of those are interactions, and you want as many of those in a course as possible that that meet the objectives and that are as authentic as possible, I think. And but all of them are important.
Great. Okay, I do have another one here. Oh, this is just a level setting question from Tiara, and it just says, please briefly describe a hybrid course. Tiara says, I've taught traditional and some flip. Thanks.
Yeah, I consider a hybrid course to be a mixture of in-classroom and online components. That's usually what I mean by hybrid, and I think most people do. So it could be, flipped classroom, as some people know that term. But before flipped classroom was a thing, there were lots of other types of hybrids, where teachers used an online or a computer component to supplement the in-classroom experience.
Okay, very good. Here's a question. I'm not sure the scope of this one, if we can necessarily handle a lot of information on this one here, but I'll throw it out there. And if you guys have any comments on it. This is a question from Ozlem, and it says, what's the role of, I'm not sure what serious necessarily means, but serious games in online learning?
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing more of that. Any commentary on that from either of you in terms of content?
Yeah, so gamification is a really interesting notion because, and I think for me personally, what is most compelling about it is how it relates to motivation, because that is, if you look at why folks engage in in games, in online games of a variety of sorts, there are various types of motivators that are driving someone to keep playing, to either achieve certain levels, collect stuff, earn badges, whatever. So I think that it's about integrating elements of gamification, not so that they're bells and whistles, but that they really do have a purpose in whatever context, whatever course you're developing.
Right, and I would almost think that that the rule for videos almost applies to games too, but I'm not sure about this. But sometimes videos can be very appealing to students, but that doesn't necessarily mean they learn from them. And so I would think that gaming could go that same way. So I would say games are great, especially for motivation and for learning in a way that you don't quite feel like you're learning. But you want to be careful to select games or that actually motivate the student to learn and not just have fun.
Great. Okay, I have one last question for today, and it kind of makes me chuckle. It says, how do I become a subject matter expert? From Samantha. Any tips on that? I think usually when you get a lot of instructors, you're all subject matter experts, right? But I think she was obviously referencing how we do things here at Acrobatiq.
For us, that's really determined on a per course basis. We have multiple ways of finding and and getting SMEs to work on our courses. And I guess all I could say to that is, if you're interested, make sure to leave your information. Yeah, and
you never know.
And
you never know
what
what we'll be
happens
working on next.
as we take on new development efforts. So
yeah.
Very good. Very good. Wow. That's the last question that we have time for today. We've had you guys stick around for a little bit longer than we anticipated, and we do appreciate that. We will do our best to answer. There's a handful of questions left out there that that we will get to after the event, and we will email you a response within the week. So we'd like to invite you to help us make improvements to these types of webinars, since we'd like to continue doing them. So 3-question survey after this webinar. After you leave it, just pop answers into those quickly for us, and we really appreciate it. We want to thank you for attending today's webinar panel, Essentials of Effective Online Course Content. Also, just a reminder that this webinar will be available for you on demand starting tomorrow. So watch your inbox as we send you details. Thank you to our learning engineers, Kim Henry and Aaron Serwinski, and thanks to all of you for taking time out of your day to participate. I'm Sharon Schwarzmiller. Have a great day.